Visionary comes to my mind when I talk about my today's guest, and with the technology part is huge. He will introduce himself way better in the interview, so stick around. He is a global data and tech venture expert, TEDx speaker, change agent. Please help me welcome Dr. David Bray. Welcome,
Greetings.
Dr. David.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here with you. Thank you.
Let me start with this. Where were you? What happened? Who are you surrounded with that inspired you to do what you do today?
Well, great question. And I would say I have to give credit first, of course, obviously to my parents. My father was a minister, Methodist minister. My mom was a school teacher. And so clearly they picked a path that was about service to others. And I think that was my model. And then along the way, I was fortunate enough to run into several people. I would attribute back when I was 17, I had the fortune to meet someone by the name of Dr. William Jeffrey. At the time, he was working at a place called the Institute for Defense Analyses. He's now currently the CEO of SRI, Stanford Research Institute. And he ended up being my mentor at an early age. We've been friends ever since. Also along the way, interacted with someone by the name of Carol Dumaine. Carol was one of these people who was out to do good in the world and do so across the public sector and the private sector. And so I attribute Carol a lot as well. And I two other people, at least, and there's probably many, many, many more, but two other people I'd want to give caveats to would be a person by the name of Dr. Ben Kaczynski. He was my PhD dissertation advisor, and he's one of those people that was always scanning the future for what's coming next. And I think that's something that I would like to think that I've both learned from him on and embodied as well. And then Dr. Jennifer Lerner at Harvard, who is focusing on leadership and decision-making in the 21st century and how we can be aware of both how we use our head, but also how we can be aware of our emotions and the emotions of others to lead boldly, bravely, and benevolently. As to where I am, right now I'm at the Atlantic Council at the Geotech Center that's focusing on the impact of data and technology on geopolitics and vice versa. We released in May of 2021 a bipartisan set of recommendations on data and technologies and where nations may want to think to go if they want to uplift people, prosperity, and peace using technology. And this, as I said, was a bipartisan set of recommendations that included Senator Mark Warner from Virginia, Senator Rob Portman from Ohio, Representative Mike McCall from Texas, and Representative Suzanne DelBene from Washington State. And so in the midst of everything where things seem to be polarized or divisive or misinformation seems to be pulling us apart, we still succeeded in actually getting bipartisan set of recommendations that have gotten praise from folks in Europe, folks in Southeast Asia as well, Singapore, Australia, and some colleagues both in Africa and the Middle East as well. So it's not meant to be exclusively a U.S. set of recommendations. And really just sort of trying to champion working across the aisle, working across sectors, working across nations, because this is all one planet. We are all one species, humanity. And there are some very important choices ahead of us in the decade ahead regarding data and technology and where we want to go.
Wonderful. What are top 3 mistakes to avoid?
Yes. First mistake, especially with data and technology, it is changing so rapidly. Don't try to go by yourself. Wherever possible, try to build a network of folks, not just in your organization, because you run the risk if it's in your own organization, they may all just think the same way, or they may only be seeing a certain lens on the issue. Build a set of networks, almost an ecosystem approach to people across sectors, across aisles, across nations. I'm a big believer of what I call our knowledge ecosystems, which differ from knowledge management. Knowledge management is top down, but it would assume that you already know what knowledge is valuable, and I don't think we do. Instead of a knowledge ecosystem approach is really just sort of maximizing the likelihood that good knowledge transfers will occur. At the Geotech Center, I've embodied this by also empowering both a large number of senior fellows globally, but also what we have is our Action Council, which is also a global set of data and technology and geopolitical experts, because the world is changing so much, we need as many different expert eyes with different lenses on the issue to be scanning it. The second mistake to avoid, the most important thing any leader can do is make visible the invisible in an organization. But know that when you make visible the invisible in an organization, they may not respond well initially. There's a reason why it was invisible. They may not have been consciously wanting to see it. They may want to have politically wanting to try and deny that it was occurring. And so when you make visible the invisible, have a strategy for how you're going to manage the friction or the backlash, or when people say that's not the case, to address that. And then the third mistake, have an internal compass heading, because as you move through life, you're going to get buffeted by winds and currents and tides and eddies and people that say you're not going the right way or get back in your box. And to some degree, you should listen to that feedback. You should incorporate it. But you should have enough strength of character and enough ability to reflect and say, is there something I can learn from this person that's saying, get back in my box, or you're not in the right place, or you're not going the right path? Is there something I can learn from that? But also at the end of the day, also say, you know what, maybe I am doing the right path and they're just either not seeing it yet, or maybe it's a reaction to making visible the invisible. And so the third thing I would say is just make sure you have enough to both reflect on what people share with you, but also stay true to your compass heading, if indeed that's the right calling.
What is your greatest failure story? What did you learn and how did you recover from it?
Oh, well, I think one has to recognize that on any path to success, you're going to have bumps on the roads and you're going to have failures. And I think, if anything, it is really, failure is simply to not see something when it goes wrong, or something when something goes bump, and not being able to find something to learn from that. I often say I want to be in a state that I call able. Always be learning environments. ABLE is the acronym, ABLE, always be learning environments. And so my greatest failure story, well, I don't know, because life's not over yet, so there may be some more things on the horizon. But I think I once had an experience where I was early on in my career where I had been assigned to be a senior executive. And in the United States, senior executives are sort of like the flag staff that's the translation layer between political will and what needs to be done in government. And I had taken this role. I was with the intelligence community, but in the intelligence community, you're not usually reporting to political appointees. In this case, I was assigned to one, and it was a unique circumstance. But the person who I had initially been sort of talking to, interviewing with before the role started, changed before I showed up. And the new person had a completely different way of looking at things, and it was a different way than what I'd been prepared for. In fact, I was in a policy role, and this person wasn't quite sure we even needed policy. So the challenge was I did not do enough of the translation, but also to some degree shielding the team from the flack. Because, part of politics, and I've never been political, I've always been nonpartisan, but part of politics is you have things that sort of are done for either political reasons or opportunity reasons that may or may not be consistent with where the organization was already heading. And again, that's not the fault things. I mean, that's the nature of our system, at least in the United States, is that we have political will. These people are elected and then they appoint people. But I thought I was doing the right thing in terms of translating directly what the person wanted to the rest of the workforce. And really what you realize is that when you're put in that sort of senior role, yes, there are times when you need to make sure you're transparent and you're showing what the direction that you're receiving is from top leadership. But other times you need to actually sort of manage the friction of changing expectations. And in fact, I often tell people, cross your arms and then try and cross them the other way. And you'll feel that feels uncomfortable. And if you're really being a leader and if you're really being a senior executive, you need to recognize that often you are asking people to do things that are uncomfortable, and you have to manage that friction. And so basically the short version is I saw where things were going much earlier than I think the rest of the team did, and I may have telegraphed too much too soon, as opposed to having a strategy for the change management. But I'm glad I had that experience early on, because what I learned from it is there are some people that are always good at pivoting and adapting, and there's other people that takes a little bit more time, and the art of a good leader is meeting people where they're at with change management, change expectations, and bringing them along.
Thank you. Great to learn from each of the answers, and I'm glad we are recording it so I can refer back to it. So, what are 3 top success secrets that others can follow?
Well, maybe the first success secret builds off the previous one, which is, that I define the word, that failure is simply not seizing a learning opportunity presented to you. Along the way, you're going to have things go not as you expected. I mean, if you have things go exactly as you expect all the time, you're not trying hard enough. You're not taking enough risk. You're not doing things that are bold or brave enough. And so I often say the word fail is actually an acronym as well. It's first attempt at iterative learning, FAIL, first attempt at iterative learning. And so the success is when something doesn't go right, don't give up or don't try to double down on what you expected it to be. Instead, say, what is the universe trying to tell me? What are these people trying to tell me? What is the circumstance trying to tell me? And how can I pivot and adapt and make it a success? And I've heard from others as well, people that I consider to be extremely successful who say, if you had told me 20 or 30 years ago I would be where I am now, I would have thought you're crazy. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't, that you look at people's LinkedIn profiles and you're like, oh, they must have had vision and everything like that. And it's like, well, they did to a degree. But really, I think what defines success is the ability to learn, adapt, and do, and continue that iteration of learn, do, adapt, learn, do, adapt, learn, do, adapt. So I think that's the first success story, is recognize that, not everything's going to go your way. But what really makes success is when you receive something different than you expected, but you still find ways to bring good about in it. The second is, again, building on something I think I said earlier, which is this ecosystem approach, that we're in a world in which it's changing rapidly on so many fronts, not just data and technology, but how the world is changing, geopolitics, societies, questions about how we work, the future of work, how do we live, that if you only have a select group of friends and colleagues in a certain sector with a certain way of seeing a problem, you will fall behind and you'll miss things. You'll have blind spots. And so wherever possible, cultivate a diversity of views both in terms of experiences, life experiences, where people are coming from, political backgrounds. And it doesn't necessarily mean you have to agree with each other. In fact, if anything, the art of a good leader is being with people that you may not always agree with, but you find appreciation for their talents or the way they see the world and their experiences. And then the third thing I would say is a success story. Good leaders give credit to the team when things go right. And when things don't go well, take the hit. I think, especially if you want to build a team and move forward, when a team is going to watch you, especially when you say, I want to empower you. In fact, my whole philosophy is you get good people, you give them a destination, you give them boundary conditions, but you let them explore how to get there directly. Because if you try to micromanage people, and I've been micromanaged, it doesn't usually end well. I've had that happen. It's not well at all. So instead, you define the boundary conditions. You're there to help if people have questions along the way, or they say, I've encountered this obstacle, but give them the vision, give them the boundary conditions. But when you empower a team like that, the team is going to watch you when the first time something doesn't go well, and they're going to see how you respond. And you should never respond with, whose fault is this? What went wrong here? Who do we blame? Instead, you sort of say, okay, what can we learn from this? What can we do different? And how can we move forward? And I'm a big believer of that. I've also had situations where I parachuted into a role where there had been 9 people in that role in 8 years prior to my arrival. And whenever you have that amount of turnover, 9 people in 8 years, things must be going great for you for number 10. And early on, I got together and I say, so where do we want to go? I asked the team, where do we want to go? And you could tell they were hesitant. And in fact, I even said, how many of you are wondering if I'm still going to be here in 6 months? And to their credit, about half the people said yes. And then towards the end, I was getting ready to wrap. Someone said, I have a beef. And I said, okay, well, could you tell me more? What's the issue? He says, I have an issue. And I said, well, what's the issue? And he said, it happened 15 years ago. And I said, okay, could you tell me more? And he proceeded to tell me the story. And of course, I had just arrived, and there had been 9 people in 8 years prior to my arrival. But after listening to him, I said, I appreciate you sharing that with me. What do you think we should do in terms of using that lesson learned or that experience to inform what we do now? And that's really sort of the pivot of move from problem holding, problem admiring, to problem solving and getting things done, and doing so in a way that brings everybody along. And it's not just on your shoulders, but you're bringing everybody along. And so I guess the third thing I would say is, give credit to the team when everything goes right. Take the hits when something goes wrong, even if it wasn't your fault. Take the hit because you're the leader in that role. And when you go back to the team, do it more in terms of what can we learn from this? What do we do different? What do we do now? And make it a team effort to be the problem solvers, not just you.
Thank you. We are entering into a speed round. That means short questions and quick answers. Are you ready for it?
I guess I'm ready. Go ahead.
What is the most impactful business book you have read, and what did you learn from it?
Yes, well, so given that you had given me a little bit of a heads up, it's actually called The Biology of Business. It's by John Clippinger. It was actually something I was doing when I was doing my PhD, and it was trying to look at how much can we learn from biology about organizations. And so you've already heard me talk about ecosystems approaches. And I think that's, again, so critical to the era we're in, which is we're in an era of turbulence, of massive change, that we have to adapt. And if you look at what life does, life adapts. And so we have to ask for our organizations, whether they be government organizations, whether they be private sector organizations, whether they be startups, universities, whatever they are, have we built organizations that are not adaptable, that when the hurricane comes, they don't bend with the wind, they don't actually pivot, and they fall apart, they're brittle? Or can we build ones that are much more like at life, that have sensing mechanisms to adapt, that can bend with the wind, can change with the times? And that's what I would really say from the biology of business.
What do you want to be remembered for?
Yes, I would, whenever it is, when I'm 80, 90, or 100, I would like to look back and say, the several decades prior were a period of massive technological data and geopolitical change for the world, including social questions of where do we go, how do we govern, how do we work. That I did my best to work across the aisle, to work across sectors, to find action and solutions that uplifted people, prosperity, and peace. Whether that was in the private sector or in government, that I helped people navigate turbulence for outcomes that uplifted people as much as possible.
How do you overcome a challenge life throws at you?
Embrace it. See it as an opportunity to learn, opportunity to grow. You can't run away from it. You shouldn't run away from it. You should just embrace it head on, hug it, and say, what can I learn from this, and how can I grow from this?
What do you want to do when you grow up?
I don't know if I ever will grow up, but I would say I think I'm doing what I think I'm doing what I would like to do, which is approach life as a experience to lead, do, and adapt, and repeat, continuously. I mean, I'm one of those people. I look at what my father did. He was good at healing fragmented congregations and then doing some sort of capital planning activity and moving on. He was very successful most of the time. Sometimes fragmented congregations still have their problems, but most times he was very successful. I realized I've become that. I like situations where they're thorny data and technology issues, but also maybe questions about, where do we go as an organization, people questions, or even cross-sector questions. I like to try and build a congregation, do some major activity, capital planning, or some major initiative, get it done, and then move on to the next assignment.
Once you have a revenue generating idea, how do you convince your significant other?
Well, usually I explain it as I give both my pitch, my emotional pitch, but I also give the analytics behind it. And she's a really great sounding board to sort of say, well, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? And so I sort of, for the things that I really am passionate about, I make sure she's both involved in it. And in some respects, I ask her to play the devil's advocate.
What are you grateful for today?
Grateful for the morning, the sun, the light, the air, and grateful for this chance to be with you, Mohammed, and have this conversation. Grateful for, I have right now a 4-year-old son, grateful for that and my wife. Basically just grateful for what life gives you on a daily basis.
Who is your living mentor and what is the impact they have on you?
Well, as you heard, I think I have many, ranging from again, Bill Jeffrey. He and I, literally, I got called down to the principal's office when I was 17, and it was him and some other people, and they wanted to offer me a job involving work with the U.S. government and some satellites. I know that's not a normal 17-year-old story, but that's we've been in touch ever since. So I'd say Bill Jeffrey, but I would also say again, I already mentioned Carol Dumaine, Dr. Jennifer Lerner, Dr. Ben Kaczynski. All my friends, I look at it, they're my friends, not just because I like to be with them, but I learn from something from them every time we meet.
Why is being impactful important to you?
I think at the end of the day, it's a way that one is not selfish. I mean, we know from biology, going again back to the biology of business, we know that evolution has experienced selection pressures that resulted in humans that are to some degree very self-interested. I mean, we're born into the world ourselves, and we learn about the world ourselves, and we run the risk, if we're not careful, we think the world revolves around us, and it doesn't. And being impactful and working with others on impact is a way to overcome the boundaries of self to selflessness. And again, it's not saying that you don't have interests and you have things that you want, but it's a chance to be part of the greater human condition and spirit. And so for me, being impactful is a chance to transcend what could be a limited life just through the views of myself, and to embrace one where I'm learning from others, I'm hearing from others, I'm engaging them and understanding their perspectives on things that will last far after and far long after I'm gone.
Who is your ideal client?
Well, someone who has a near impossible mission and is willing to admit that it's a near impossible mission and wants to make it happen. I jokingly say, I say, give me your thorniest problems, things that people have tried, it hasn't worked out, things that, again, we'll do our best and we'll make it succeed. But my ideal client would be someone who is at the stage where they have a thorny, near impossible mission, and they know they need to do something differently, and they're interested to an approach that involves both data and technology, but also the human heart and leadership.
How can we support you?
Well, I mean, just having this conversation, I would say, and if you see people, I would say there. In terms of actually finding me, I would say the Atlantic Council is available at atlanticcouncil.org, and you can find a report specifically at atlanticcouncil.org/geotech report. That is GEOTECH report, geotech report. Highly recommend that. Also, you can find me on LinkedIn. However, if you do find me on LinkedIn, please send me a message saying, I am not a bot. I have seen your video, because I do get way too many bot requests, and I apologize for that, but it's always useful if you can actually say, I saw and found you through this great video that you did with Mohammed, and we went from there.
What would you say about your guest experience on the show today?
I truly enjoyed it, and truly enjoyed the opportunity to actually talk about how one can lead, do, and adapt, both with courage and with heart, and understanding that it is about how do we use data and technology to uplift the world.
What would you say as a final word?
Well, I often like to end with, as you move forward through life, I have basically 3 recommendations. Please be bold, please be brave, and please be benevolent for the future ahead.
Thank you so much, Dr. David. We really appreciate your time and wisdom on the behalf of Entrepreneur Empowerment Club. We really appreciate you. I hope our path cross again with another amazing guest. Until then, you have a wonderful time.
Thank you.